Welcome to Global Affairs Unfiltered. I am Jack Stockwell and glad to be with you this morning, this Monday morning, 23rd day of February. Gee, less than a week to go, and this year will be 2 months behind us. So many things to cover, so many things to be a part of this morning that I want to be able to clearly get across, especially all the hubbub that's been going on with this Tucker Carlson, Mike Huckabee interview that has created an uproar by endorsing Greater Israel in this interview with Carlson. This is the U.S. ambassador to Israel endorsing the Greater Israel. Now, in order for the Greater Israel to occur, there are things that have to unoccur. There are things that have to disappear, like other sovereignties. Now, this 6-minute exchange has shocked countries throughout the world, the region, the 6-minute exchange over Greater Israel. Carlson said that according to the Bible, the descendants of Abraham would receive land stretching from the Nile to the Euphrates, which would include essentially the entire Middle East. And so Carlson asked Ambassador Huckabee, does Israel have a right to all of that land? And Huckabee said what? If you are familiar with it, this is the U.S. ambassador. And of course, the U.S. ambassador represents the executive branch of the government. An ambassador to another country doesn't represent our military, doesn't represent our financial stuff, although they're involved with these things, obviously. They don't represent the social programs of the United States. They represent the Oval Office and carry out the dictates of the president, or they get fired. And so here's Huckabee representing Donald Trump, and he said it would be fine if they took it all. Now, he hastened to add that Israel is not trying to take all the land, and that it has a right to security in the land that it legitimately holds. Of course, that all depends on how you define legitimately. But Carlson pressed him on whether, under Huckabee's professed religious views, that it would be legitimate for Israel to claim Lebanon, Syria, and part of Iraq. And Huckabee repeatedly sidestepped that question. I mean, does it really need saying that the Bible is not part of international law? Our treaties with other governments is not based on the Bible. Our foreign policies, up until Israel became Israel first, was not based on the Bible. Now, obviously it is now. And so Huckabee wouldn't answer the question when it was directed at him several times. Should Israel, or does Israel have claim in the biblical sense to Lebanon, Syria, and parts of Iraq? Huckabee's remarks, of course, were swiftly condemned by regional and international governments and organizations. In an interview last year, Huckabee had said that he does not believe in referring to the Arab descendants of people who had lived in British-controlled Palestine as Palestinians. What about before it was British control? Were they Palestinians then? And then after they got British control, they weren't Palestinians in Palestine anymore. They were Arabs in Palestine. And you could go back, excuse me, look at the maps. Look at the regional maps of this area. Where it says today Israel, it says Palestine. Decades after decades going back into history. But the important thing is that Huckabee said he does not believe in referring to the Arab descendants as Palestinians. Well, of course, that would give identity to Palestine. So following the posting of this otherwise humiliating interview, Huckabee posted this very petulant response on X, crying that Carlson's questions were conspiracy theories. And he should never have asked the U.S. ambassador these conspiracy questions. And he linked them He linked those of that particular camp to anti-Semites like Nick Fuentes, David Duke, Candace Owens, in order to avoid addressing them. That's very typical of any politician. You ask them a question that's going to expose them. They can't answer it one way or the other without being exposed, so they just dismiss it as a conspiracy theory and probably of anti-Semitic origin. So Huckabee's comments of endorsing a greater Israel sparked this immediate backlash across the Middle East, which of course is Muslim majority. 14 governments, Egypt, Jordan, the UAE, Indonesia, Pakistan, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, Oman, Bahrain, Lebanon, Syria, and Palestine, along with the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the League of Arab States, and the Gulf Cooperation Council, all issued a joint statement in response to Huckabee's very racist comments. And in a statement that was posted by the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the signatories, quote, expressed their strong condemnation and profound concern regarding Huckabee's comments. They're dangerous, inflammatory, and a flagrant violation of the principles of international law and the Charter of the United Nations. They warn that such rhetoric threatens regional security and stability. You think? When he essentially says your land is our land. So the statement also argued that the ambassador's comments directly undercut President Trump's own stated vision for the region, including President Trump's peace plan to end the Gaza conflict, which of course envisions de-escalation and a path towards Palestinian statehood. Well, that doesn't fit into what Huckabee had to say. And the signatories said that rhetoric legitimizing control of their nation's territory just fuels tensions rather than advancing peace. You know, there's a lot of namby-pamby, verbiage here on the part of the Arab nations. They should just come right out and say what it is. But they underscored that the plan is grounded in promoting tolerance and peaceful coexistence, and that remarks seeking to legitimize control over these lands of others, it just undermines the objectives. The governments reaffirmed that Israel holds no sovereignty over the occupied Palestinian territories or other occupied Arab lands, rejected any annexation of the West Bank or separation of it from Gaza, and opposed continued settlement expansion. And they reiterated their commitment to Palestinian self-determination and statehood along the pre-1967 lines, and called for an end to what they described as incendiary and expansionist rhetoric. Now, Iran, which was not a signer of this document, interestingly enough, issued their own comments. They said Mike Huckabee's postulation that it would be fine if Israel took it all and expand from the Nile to the Euphrates is a bold testament to American active complicity in Israeli regime's expansionist wars of aggression as well as colonial genocide of the Palestinians, end quote. This is what I mean by, well, at least Iran called it for what it is. And as the largest flotilla ever amassed by the American Navy is on its way or gathering there and surrounding this area geographically, Iran still comes out with these kinds of comments because they know war's coming. They can see the writing on the wall. But the whole issue here is Huckabee. Huckabee is expressing opinions, and I'm not so sure they're reflective of Trump. Trump can't fire him. Boy, that would really look bad, although he should. He should because of this interview, what he said in this interview. Because what he's saying in this interview is outside the established stated foreign policy of the United States regarding the peace interests of Gaza. So Carlson asks him, are you in favor of greater Israel? And then if you read the promises of God to the house of Israel, which is a little different than what they call Israel today by a long shot. Blood, DNA, genetics, whatever else you want to include in there. It's not the same group of people by any means. And in fact, I had this conversation with somebody yesterday about the Jews being God's favorite people. And I said, you need to read the Old Testament. The house of Judah was only one of 12 tribes. Look at the promises to those tribes. Why do we talk about those? Well, we can talk about it in Sunday school. I'm not going to talk about it here. Be right back. Don't break my bones, but you will never have me. See you wanted by regular.
ARUP Laboratories in Salt Lake City is hiring a medical laboratory scientist too. This position requires bachelor's degree in clinical or medical laboratory science, medical technology.
So I muted my
biological sciences.
Contact with radio. Let me turn this down.
AAB certification as MLS or MT.
I got to be able to hear it in the background. So this is just another glaring example of Israel first, America second. And Huckabee isn't any different than Marco Rubio, because Rubio's out there expressing opinions, especially in the Munich Security Conference, contrary to some of President Trump's comments. And I talked about that last week. Rubio wanting to reestablish the Western colonial empire. And they have to do this to fight against BRICS. And he's essentially telling the European nations that were gathered there, I think there's like 70 different countries that were represented at this security conference, that we can do it with you or without you, but we're going to do it. We're going to reestablish, re-strengthen, re-entrench the whole concept of the Western control of the planet. So you got to love this stuff. Are we back? All right, sounds like we're back. So that's my point. With Rubio saying things that are contrary to the president, and now Huckabee saying things that are contrary to what the president said. Who's in charge here? Well, Huckabee, I think, wants to become a governor of Greater Israel, and Rubio is running for president in 2028 against Vance. So they're trying to look as powerful as they possibly can in the coming change of sovereignties and borderlines. Now, the congressional Democrats love this stuff. So where is the U.S. Congress on President Trump's handling of the Middle East and his threat of war on Iran? So according to Drop Site News, it's the one I've been looking at lately, I think it's pretty good. The Democrats are just very cynically looking for Trump to step into disaster ahead of the midterm elections. If he were to decide to go ahead and attack Iran, with the popular opinion in this country almost solidly 60-some% against it, I don't know. I think almost any Democrat can throw their hat into the ring and have a good chance of beating a rather strong seated Republican representative. So the Hill sources on the Hill told Drop Site News that many Democrats remain convinced that a war with Iran is both the right policy and politically beneficial for them. So the War Powers resolution that was sponsored by Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie will force the Democrats and Republicans to go on the record for or against the war when it comes to a vote this week. It's interesting that Mike Johnson is bringing that to the floor. But then you're going to find out who is going to let the deep state continue to run this country or who's willing to stand up against it. Now, regarding Trump's calculations, sources with knowledge, and I'm quoting from DropSite, sources with knowledge of internal White House deliberations told DropSite that Trump is emboldened by what he sees as his phenomenal success with Venezuela, issuing these sweeping demands for capitulation under threat of removing the ruling government and then abducting President Maduro when he refused to obey. Then DropSite also said, but the sources said Trump and his aides have pressed war planners for assurances that chaos produced by any U.S. military action would calm down in time for the midterm election season to kick into high gear. In reality, there's no one who can actually give such assurances. Now, a lot of political machinations are based on the fact that the average American can't remember past 2 weeks. And they are swelled with emotional tides one way or the other. And so I can see why a lot of the Republicans, especially the White House, wouldn't necessarily be concerned by public opinion where it is right now. I mean, look at Congress, look at the House of Representatives and the Senate. Some of the lowest levels of popular support ever, and yet they continue to get reelected. So I think the Republicans are banking on that. And President Trump and the Republican Party will throw the country a bone sometime through September and October that'll make things look a lot better. But the Democrats kind of cynically say things like, well, Trump is walking into a trap of his own making. So DropSite noted that there was this June 2025 private conversation between a foreign policy aide to Democratic Senate Majority Leader Schumer and a top official in an organization opposing Iran strikes. Neither one, DropSite takes the time to mention their name. But the aide told DropSite that a substantial number of Senate Democrats believed Iran ultimately needed to be dealt with militarily. Well, because they get money from AIPAC, probably. But those Democrats, the aide explained, also understood that going to war again in the Middle East would be a political catastrophe. And that's precisely why they want Trump to be the one to do it. The hope was that Iran would take a blow, and so would Trump, which would be a win-win for the Democrats. The Democrats who want to see Iran cut back, and the Democrats who want to see a massacre in the midterms. So this aide, unnamed aide, tried to claim that Schumer wasn't aligned with such a view. But about 2 weeks before the midnight hammer strikes back in June 2025, the 12-day thing, Schumer had taunted the president as Taco Trump, T-A-C-O, Trump always chickens out, accusing him of making big threats and then backing down. And according to congressional records, the aide who offered the denials on behalf of Schumer has taken at least 2 trips to Israel in the past few years, paid for by AIPAC. And furthermore, the Democrats, including Schumer, were all on board when Israel launched the 12-day war, if you remember. And it wouldn't do any good for the Republican Party to point this out to the citizens of this country, that when that 12-day war happened June of last year, the Democrats were behind it as much as Republicans, because that's not how the American mindset thinks. The American mindset thinks the way the media makes them think. And the way the media makes them think is the way the owners of the media makes them think. And you know who they are. All right. Now, I think all of you, wherever you might be, I think the world is holding its breath, and I want to welcome the audience that's outside the state of Utah. We get email from you at the office at jackstockwell.com. I get your emails, and I try to address subjects you want to hear, especially on the health show. But I know we have a growing audience outside of the state, and I think most of the hosts at K-Talk can say the same thing. But the world right now is holding its breath, or it should be, because we are threatened with an incredible escalation of this strategic situation around Iran. Because President Trump has announced that he said this last week, he's going to make his decision on a new military strike against Iran within the next 10 days. Again, I was expecting something over the weekend. However, it could be as early as today or this coming weekend. Of course, this coming weekend's outside the 10 days, because many of the American media said that, and this was Friday, I think they said it, that within the next 3 days, the decision could be made. And now we have the biggest armada ever amassed, with 2 aircraft carriers and many, many fighter jets and other military equipment in the region. So it's almost ready to go. I mean, why would you bring all this in there unless all you wanted to do was just intimidate Iran? And we're not there to destroy their nuclear stuff. Of course, we destroyed that. We'll be right back. For those of you on the stream, we destroyed that stuff, as you remember, when we obliterated it last summer. And when you obliterate something, what need is there to obliterate it again?
For over 40 years,
I don't know. I think it's kind of funny. But why in the world? Let me bring this volume down a little more. Why in the world would you amass an armada of this size? Aircraft carriers, and the George Bush is there now, Abraham Lincoln, George Bush, which is the biggest aircraft carrier ever made, with at least 4 or 5 varieties of fighters and interceptors on that ship, sitting there in these waters as an obvious target to hypersonic missiles. That's the thing that concerns me the most. Now, they have stayed outside of hypersonic missile range. And we know that Iran has these hypersonic missiles. But when you look at where Iran is situated and where the Mediterranean is on one side and the Arabian Sea on the other side, they are outside the range of attack by our own jets on Iran, without these jets being able to be refueled in flight. So there's a massive tankers that are over there as well. And they're being based in Turkey and a couple of places in Africa. So that, here we go. So that they can reach Iran, deliver their payload and make it back only because of the tankers. Now, with this biggest armada ever put together, I mean, if this happens, if this actually happens, all hell may break loose, because Iran has just concluded, together with Russia, these military maneuvers in the Straits of Hormuz and in the Gulf of Oman, and that is where 20% of the world's oil is passing through on a daily basis. So if that would be cut off, it would trigger an enormous economic crisis in the entire world. a financial blowout for that matter, which may be the intended trigger. So Iran, obviously, for whom this is an existential question for them in their country, has already announced that if they're attacked, they will answer with a massive strike against the U.S. facilities in the region, maybe Israel or both, and this could lead to unforeseeable consequences. I was looking at this interview with Ted Postel from MIT, the nuclear expert, and he was showing the wide distribution of, say, 100 missiles aimed at Israel. And if they were to tighten the actual targeted area by a little more sophistication in the software guided missiles, by I think like 5%, almost all these 100 missiles would hit Tel Aviv, which of course would leave Tel Aviv nothing but smoldering ruins. And Iran said they will do it. You attack us. Last time, we know the missiles that we got through your Iron Dome were missiles that you can't stop. We proved that. You can't stop the hypersonics. You might knock out one or two, but hundreds of them are going to get through. Only this time, we're not going to just target military targets to show you that we can do it. We're going to reduce Israel to a smoldering cinder and to U.S. bases throughout the Middle East. Now, surely President Trump has been advised of this. But there are people in the Oval Office, there are people in the military. President Trump, don't do it. Don't do it. It's not a matter of losing the midterms and your subsequent impeachment and perhaps jail term. It could be World War III. So on the table is the question that Iran should not be allowed to enrich nuclear material at all, which of course is the red line, because Iran, completely justifiable, says that they have a right for enrichment of uranium for peaceful purposes, like every other country. And they still have the fatwa that they do not want, for religious reasons, to build nuclear weapons. That what they want to do is being just assumed all the time that they're trying to create a nuclear bomb. And if they were trying to do that, it would already be done. It would have been done before last June. But it's actually not true. Some of our best intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, Director of National Intelligence. When is the last time you saw her in a public press conference? When's the last time you saw her standing anywhere near the president? What's President Trump doing with Tulsi Gabbard? He's left her in this position. Does he have nighttime phone calls with her? On a burner phone so he can get around the CIA's monitoring of all activity in the White House? See, this is about regime change. This isn't about Iran's nuclear capabilities. It's about regime change. So they want to put the son of the Shah back in there because he's American friendly. And when you get an American friendly leader of the country, then the foreign policy is much easier to pull off on these people. Does Israel want an American friendly? Yes and no. As long as that the American friendly leader of Iran is not opposed to greater Israel. Oh, brother. And then naturally, of course, Iran is supposed to give up support for the so-called axis of resistance, Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis, which they in all likelihood will not and cannot do either of them, and they certainly cannot disarm Hamas. So there are many demands which make the outcome of these negotiations extremely iffy. Because for Iran, there are several red lines involved. Now, if there is an escalation, it could easily throw the world into an uncontrollable escalation, because then if Iran strikes back very hard with its ballistic missiles, which it has said it will do, the question is, will the use of nuclear weapons on the side of Israel come into play? That's the question. Is that Gideon's hammer? I think that's Gideon's hammer. Nukes. We know Israel has nukes. They got a lot of them out there in the Negev desert. They still won't admit it, but everybody else knows it's there. And this could set off an escalation on a global scale where the result would be the end of mankind, of which I'm absolutely aware of that myself. Now, what is happening here right now is an unbelievable portrayal of media lies. I want to say starting with Huckabee, but he's a part of it. And Iran has done absolutely nothing to cause this, because the entire Western narrative about the recent killings of a lot of people in Iran, the way the West is portraying it, basically that it was the evil regime in Tehran that did this, while the evidence is that this whole action was a regime change operation anyway, which was openly claimed by Scott Bessent in a U.S. Senate hearing that was supposedly, he used the term economic statecraft. They're not going to use the word regime change. It was economic statecraft on the part of the United States, using a run on the bank, using the long-term effect of the sanctions, forcing the central bank of Iran to pump liquidity to prevent a blowout, which led to the incredible inflationary spiral. Then the people naturally cannot bear these hardships. Where have you heard that technique before? The Confessions of an Economic Hitman, maybe? That this is typical of American foreign policy to effect a regime change? First you invite him to do it, then you try to force him into do it, and if that doesn't, then you assassinate him. But it was an effort from the outside, then supported with the influx of all these armed terrorist forces. Pompeo, in his statement, this is it prima facie evidence? Is that what you? This is incontrovertible evidence as to what's really going on here. When Pompeo sent that tweet where he said behind every demonstrator was a Mossad agent. And it's generally recognized by the CIA, it was generally recognized that the CIA was heavily involved in this, as they are in every country when color revolutions take place. So it's who does the CIA represent? The corporations, the billionaire oligarchs. So it's an unbelievable situation, but it's part of the new reality which has emerged in this recent period according to the doctrine of might makes right. So in other words, the powerful do what they can, and those who are less powerful have to stand around, pick up the pieces, and suffer the consequences. Now that obviously is a situation which is throwing the whole world into chaos right now, and if this strike against Iran occurs, which hopefully can still be prevented, it would potentially throw the Middle East into absolute total chaos. I mean, can you imagine if there is no more unified government in Iran? And balkanization will take place. New terrorism, new waves of refugees. So it would be at the absolute disadvantage of naturally the Iranians, the entire region, Europe, which would be confronted with these influxes of refugees. I mean, it's an insane operation. And I think the international community is really called upon to help Iran prove that this Western narrative is not what has actually happened. Because if you do not correct these kinds of things, the next thing will naturally follow. Now, obviously, the The statement was made at the occasion of the first meeting of Trump's peace board, so-called. And it's noted that there was not one sub-Saharan nation invited to it. And there are now African authors who refer to the fact that this confirms the mindset of President Trump, who back in January of 2012, when he was asked by congressmen, basically said the U.S. should not accept so many immigrants from these SHIT whole countries, referring to Africa. Now, Trump has denied that he ever said that, but at a rally in 2025 in Pennsylvania, he repeated it and said, why don't we have more immigrants from Norway, not from filthy, disgusting places like Somalia? I mean, this shows a colonial mindset trying to be polite. And the entire idea of the Board of Peace, while it is clearly stated it's supposed to replace the United Nations, is not trying to reform the UN in any way where it would be made functional, but to create this parallel organization which consolidates the rule of the powerful. And this invitation of Netanyahu to be a part of the Board of Peace, I heard this analogy the other day. That's like inviting Jeffrey Epstein to be on the board of directors of childcare. Now, the other major earthquake, which is shaking the world's situation, is this unfolding of the Epstein scandal, where just last week, the headlines were dominated by the arrest of former Prince Andrew, who is now Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, who was arrested at his residence, not because of sexual misbehavior, not because of the sexual crimes that he allegedly has committed, but because he gave confidential information to Epstein when he was in charge of the United Kingdom trade affairs, and obviously part of some larger illegal deals. Then also more names are coming out. Many of the mentors of Epstein, like the billionaire Les Wexner, who owns Victoria's Secret. You know, I mean, that's no crime. But what he does is a crime. And there's a lot coming out now in terms of he was being questioned and then distanced himself and said this con man, he had nothing to do with it. That Wexner had nothing to do with Epstein. Now, I think Thomas Massie is correct when he said that this whole Epstein thing is bigger than Watergate because it involves decades of cover-up. And I think one has to realize that this is not just the ongoing year-long, decade-long raping and misuse of minors and girls and children for sexual exploitation in the form of modern slavery. But it is that absolutely criminal mindset which is what causes the same group of people to write the IMF policies. Again, confessions of a hitman. Denying countries access to credit, confessions of a hitman. And committing the use of AI and genocide in Gaza. It's the mindset of a class that has lost every last semblance of a moral compass. And to say that it's bestial is an insult to the beasts. Because I don't know of any other animal that would engage in such prolonged criminal behavior. Be right back. Lots of commercials. Those of you who are, the number dropped. My numbers on the stream are getting less and less. I don't know. Either I'm not interesting or I'm stepping on toes. Yeah, I just call them as I see them. I try to remain objective, but I don't need to defend myself. I think the facts as they exist is enough validation for some of my viewpoints. But it's almost funny. Thank you, Sammer. I don't know. It makes me wonder whether I want to stay with the stream for this or not, or just do the health show. Because there's a large audience. We're almost 900 subscriptions now with the health show. I don't know what I've got with this, because the numbers keep getting less. So as soon as this K-Talk commercial's over, I want to get into Marco Rubio's speech at the Munich Security Conference. And naturally, to continue with that kind of thinking, what we have seen with Marco Rubio's speech in Munich, where he basically gave a speech for which, for some strange reason, mistakenly was called more mild-mannered than the speech by Vance a year ago. But what he actually said, if you read between the lines, was just this amazing reaffirmation of colonialism. And that's what is exposing BRICS for what it is, anti-colonialism. And so he said 500 years until 1945 were all practically wonderful. That wonderful colonialism gave you slavery, gave you the raping of these nations, the stealing of their natural resources, the murdering of their patriotic, loyal government leaders to be replaced by CIA operatives. Yes, it was truly wonderful, because he said it was the spread of our system, which he completely mischaracterized in many parts. But basically, he said after 1945, everything went wrong. Obviously, because of the emergence of communism as a major competitor of the United States. Then he told the Europeans, as I said earlier in this program, either you join with us. I mean, we can do this reaffirmation of the dominance of Western culture in the world together, or basically what's already stated in the new security strategy paper from the United States, regime change for your countries in Europe if you don't go along with our perspective. Now, he didn't say it like that, but that's what's between the lines. It's not just Venezuela and Cuba and Iran that we're looking for regime change. We'll take Britain, Germany, and France if necessary. So they have, I mean, they're lackeys of the United States anyway. Why not absorb them? Now, for Europe to do that would basically mean national suicide. Because now Der Spiegel, the magazine of all places, is running a story, a so-called investigative result, that the CIA had very early knowledge about the plans to sabotage and blow up the Nord Stream pipelines. Now, Der Spiegel, one of the more popular of the magazines and news outlets in Germany. I remember when I was taking German in high school, my German teacher was a German national. She's an American citizen now, but she was in the Hitler Youth. Her father had to drag her out of the country in 1938. She fought tooth and nail, just told us the most incredible stories. But she had German magazines, German publications, the German equivalent of Life and Look, magazines of that time period. And I remember Der Spiegel. I remember seeing Der Spiegel in the classroom. And it's usually in favor of Western society. So for the Der Spiegel to print this latest article talking about how the CIA was behind blowing up the Nord Stream pipelines, I mean, that's, well, they first gave it the green light, then supposedly changed that. And so now the story now is coming out first that it was supposedly Ukrainian hobby divers. And that was changed into special forces from the Ukraine. Then it was changed to the elite troops from the Ukraine. And now the suspicion is being suggested that it was the United States that was behind the blowing up of Nord Stream, just as President Biden said it would be. Oh, we'll take care of that. Remember that? We'll take care of that. And we shouldn't forget that the highest court in Germany basically said that there's evidence that it was an operation by the Ukrainian state carried out by help from the West. Now, the French magazine Le Monde, which is kind of like Der Spiegel, only in France, basically reports that already before the second term of President Trump, there was interest coming out of the United States to take over the Nord Stream pipelines and basically keep the dominance over the European energy supply, which was the whole purpose of it in the first place. Get control of European energy. And now we see, for instance, the reason why Europe is collapsing productively, manufacturing, isn't just because money is being shifted into militarism. It's because the cost of energy per dollar of productive output is 6 times higher in Europe than it is in China. 6 times higher than it used to be when Germany could buy cheap gas from Russia. Now, if you were the United States military planning on war with Russia, what vital income to Russia could you interrupt with one single explosion? And at the same time, cause such a weakening of German economy and European economy that they would be lining up to follow the directives coming out of Marco Rubio regarding their military future. You don't have to be a genius to figure that out. You just have to be a K-Talk listener. You can figure this stuff out for yourself. Now, if you look at the Nord Stream sabotage, what it did accomplish on the one side was to sever Europe's ties with Russia, which of course has been the long-stated aim, the long-stated political aim of the United States and the Brits. Naturally, for geopolitical control and to control entirely the European access to energy, making Europe a full-fledged vassal of the United States. Now, the Chinese have made it very clear that when they suffered similar operations with the Opium Wars in the 19th century and various territorial takeovers, they're committed to never, ever again allow anything to represent the century of humiliation, as they call it. And Europe seems to be happy in suffering such a not yet century, but decades of humiliation. And the big question is, can there be evoked enough pride and backbone among the Europeans that they don't go along with the schemes of Marco Rubio? Because right now we are in a world dominated by might makes right, and the law of the jungle is unfair to the jungle, because in the jungle nothing like that exists in terms of depravity. Might make right. Might may make right in the jungle, but they're at least not depraved. It's just that different animals have their own ways, and that's detrimental to some other animals' lives, especially the herbivores. But there's no such thing as the present effort of world domination, and it also is combined with the Epstein perversion. Nothing like that visible in the animal kingdom. So We are in an obviously extremely dangerous situation. And this is why what is coming up this week, as far as a possible attack on Iran is concerned, could completely change the outcome of March for every single one of us. Today's the 23rd. March begins this weekend. You know, and daylight savings begins here in less than 2 weeks as well. That's how close we are to spring. But a new paradigm is needed here, because as long as we think that there is a legitimate interest of one country or group of countries against another one that doesn't go along with them, that is a prescription for World War III that is currently being acted out. Now, K-Talk's going to go to the news break here in just a second. I'll pick this back up a little bit tomorrow in tomorrow's update. But, you know, I still hold out hope. I still believe that Trump has a couple of Trump cards up his sleeve. K-Talk, I'll see you tomorrow. Now let me stop that recording. Donk. So I can save that recording. And then, to those of you on the stream, thanks for being a part of the program, listening. You can like and subscribe. It certainly helps the algorithms. But I gotta think whether I want to continue a stream on Monday and Tuesday, and maybe just have a Wednesday health stream. Anyway, I appreciate those who are part of it. I will see you all tomorrow as well. Be safe out there and keep your wits about you.